What if the person who seems hardest to influence becomes unusually vulnerable at the exact moment their certainty begins to crack? Not because they are weak, gullible, or unintelligent. Quite the opposite. The danger may begin with the very quality that seems to protect them: confidence in their own judgment. Someone enters a conversation convinced that their interpretation is solid and their instincts can be trusted. Then, one detail stops fitting. A contradiction appears. Something they were certain about suddenly requires another look. That is when the balance can begin to change. A person who felt confident minutes earlier starts replaying what happened, checking details they ignored, and reconsidering assumptions that once felt obvious. Nobody has necessarily defeated their argument. What changed was their confidence in the argument itself. Perhaps the most important stage of persuasion arrives before anyone changes an opinion. At the moment they begin trusting their original judgment a little less. And by the end, this pattern reverses in an important way. The same forces that can influence another person may also reveal how someone can steer your judgment without ever directly telling you what to think. Pressure does not always arrive as force. It can affect what receives attention, what feels urgent, which interpretation seems safest, or what behavior appears normal. By the time a decision feels obvious, some of the conditions surrounding that decision may already have shaped how it was evaluated. The unsettling part is that the conclusion can still feel completely personal. The ideas here are inspired by Machiavellian thinking, rather than 7 techniques Machiavelli personally documented. There is no hidden psychological formula in his writing. What connects these ideas is something broader: uncertainty, perception, status, timing, information, and the way people react when reality stops matching their expectations. So one question matters from the beginning. When your behavior changes, was it because someone proved something to you, or because the conditions around your judgment change first? The earliest signs often appear inside certainty itself. One useful way to understand perception is that the brain continually forms expectations about what may happen next. Familiar people are expected to behave in familiar ways. Meetings tend to follow recognizable rhythms. Someone who treated you warmly yesterday is likely to be expected to behave similarly today. Most of these expectations remain unnoticed because reality matches them closely enough. Then, the pattern breaks. A person responds differently from what you predicted. An explanation contains a contradiction. Someone you believed you understood raises a question you cannot answer immediately. Attention sharpens because what is happening no longer fits comfortably with what you expected. Certainty depends heavily on consistency. As long as events continue supporting your interpretation, confidence requires little effort. When important beliefs, expectations, or behaviors stop fitting together, the mind tends to search for an explanation. Psychologists use the term cognitive dissonance for one kind of discomfort associated with incompatible beliefs or behaviors. Not every surprise produces cognitive dissonance, and uncertainty does not automatically make someone irrational. The simpler point is that once an inconsistency becomes noticeable, it can be difficult to ignore. Consider someone who takes enormous pride in being rational. Their confidence may be tied to more than one conclusion. It may be tied to an identity. They see themselves as the person who notices what others miss and cannot easily be fooled. That identity feels protective, yet it may also create sensitivity around evidence suggesting the opposite. A direct attack gives the person something clear to resist. Tell them they are wrong, and they can challenge your evidence, defend their intelligence, question your motives, or dismiss the criticism. A contradiction creates a different problem because it challenges the consistency of the conclusion rather than the person directly. Perhaps one assumption conflicts with another. A crucial detail was never checked. Absolute certainty about somebody else's motives may rest on information nobody actually possesses. Once that gap becomes visible, attention can shift inward. The person may still be listening to the conversation, but part of their attention is now checking whether their original judgment still holds together. That does not make them controllable. Some reconsider, others become defensive, look for more evidence, or hold even more tightly to what they already believed. The meaningful change is that confidence, which once felt effortless, may now require maintenance. During that internal checking, outside signals can become more noticeable. Tone may carry greater weight, reassurance can feel more attractive, and new information may suddenly seem unusually important. A calm person nearby can even appear more certain than the evidence justifies. This is one reason influence is difficult to recognize. We often imagine persuasion as a contest between arguments. One side presents evidence, the other responds, and eventually the stronger case should win. Yet sometimes the psychological shift occurs earlier. The argument remains unresolved, but one person becomes less confident in the interpretation they brought into the conversation. You may have experienced this without recognizing it. A decision felt reasonable until someone questioned it. They offered little new evidence, but the question stayed with you. Hours later, you are replaying tone, sequence, memory, and details that had not bothered you before. Sometimes that process exposes a genuine mistake. Sometimes it produces uncertainty without producing new information. When no meaningful evidence has changed, but confidence has fallen sharply, doubt itself can begin feeling like evidence. A person starts assuming that because they feel uncertain, the original judgment must have been wrong. It does not follow. If a conversation suddenly makes you question yourself, examine what actually changed. Look for new facts or a genuine contradiction, rather than treating another person's confidence as proof. Otherwise, a strange reversal can happen. They never establish that their interpretation is correct. You simply become exhausted from defending yours. This is especially important for people who respond quickly, explain excessively, or depend heavily on outside reassurance. Another person's certainty may not need to overpower them. It only needs to remain steady, while their own confidence weakens. At that point, the desire to escape uncertainty can begin influencing the decision. Certainty feels like armor, but its weakness appears when you stop trusting what it protects. Doubt, however, is only the beginning. Most decisions feel conscious from the inside. We like to imagine that facts are gathered, options are compared, and a conclusion follows. Real conversations are rarely that clean. Expectation influences attention. Identity changes what feels personally threatening. Confidence affects what seems safe. Social behavior helps define what appears normal, while urgency changes how much time remains for reflection. These forces can overlap so smoothly that the resulting choice still feels completely independent. Expectation matters because nobody enters a situation as a blank slate. Suppose someone introduces a colleague as difficult but brilliant. Later, blunt behavior may be interpreted as evidence of brilliance rather than ordinary rudeness. Describe the same person as untrustworthy beforehand, and ambiguous behavior may begin to look suspicious. The behavior itself may not have changed. What changed was the expectation surrounding it. Expectation does not fully determine belief, but it can influence which details receive attention. That raises a provocative possibility. Some conversations may be partly shaped before the central discussion begins. Even before the conversation starts, a warning, rumor, or existing reputation can influence what people notice and how they interpret what follows. By the time evidence appears, people may already be looking for a particular kind of evidence. Identity creates deeper pressure. People defend more than opinions. They defend the kind of person they believe themselves to be. Someone who strongly values generosity may experience a request differently once refusal is associated with selfishness. A person who sees themselves as strong may react differently when caution is quietly framed as fear. Now, the decision is no longer only about what should be done. It has become entangled with another question. What does this choice say about me? that question can carry more emotional weight than the practical issue itself. This may explain why some arguments become intense even when the immediate stakes are small. Two people appear to be discussing one decision, while somebody is also protecting an identity built around intelligence, loyalty, independence, strength, or competence. Once identity feels threatened, changing position can feel like losing more than an argument. Certainty creates another pull. People sometimes prefer a clear answer to a complicated but accurate one. A confident voice can create stability, while hesitation creates discomfort, even when that hesitation reflects intellectual honesty. Confidence is not evidence of competence, yet when uncertainty is high, feeling certain and actually being correct can become easy to confuse. In those moments, people may be drawn not to the person with the strongest evidence, but to the person who appears least unsettled by uncertainty. That is not a universal rule. It is simply a reason to notice when confidence is carrying more persuasive weight than the facts behind it. Social influence adds another layer. When the correct choice is unclear, people naturally look at what others are doing. They notice which opinions receive approval, what behavior appears normal, and which decisions might leave them isolated. Other people's behavior can provide useful information, but repetition can also create an illusion of certainty. An interpretation heard once feels like an opinion. Repeated from several directions, the same interpretation may begin to feel obvious even when the underlying evidence has not improved. Only the number of voices changed. This is why independent perspectives matter. Competing interpretations make it harder for one version of events to feel unquestionably true, simply because everybody nearby repeats it. Without those alternatives, the question can quietly shift from whether something is true to why everybody seems to believe it. Those questions are not equivalent. Time adds the final pressure. Reflection needs room, and urgency reduces it. A demand for an immediate answer leaves less opportunity to inspect assumptions, seek another perspective, or separate emotional pressure from factual necessity. Not every urgent decision is manipulative. Sometimes circumstances genuinely require speed, but under time pressure, people may rely more heavily on information and assumptions that are already easy to access, although the effect varies depending on the decision. That is why artificial urgency deserves attention. It does not need to tell someone what to think. It can simply reduce the time available to discover that an existing assumption deserves reconsideration. Expectation shapes attention. Identity changes what feels personal. Certainty influences what feels safe. Social repetition can make one option seem normal, while urgency limits the opportunity to question those impressions. A decision can still feel entirely yours, even when the path toward it has been narrowed by the conditions around it. Influence may therefore begin before anyone makes an argument. The next shift appears once disagreement actually starts. Most people imagine disagreement as open conflict. One person pushes, the other resists, and both become increasingly committed to defending their positions. Direct confrontation has an obvious weakness. The moment someone feels attacked, they know exactly what to defend. Attention moves away from examining the idea and toward protecting the self. Tone becomes important. Motives become suspicious. Even a legitimate point can be rejected because it arrived in a form that activated resistance. A contradiction creates a different problem. Instead of giving the mind a clear enemy, it presents something that does not fit. A response fails to match an expectation. A familiar sequence breaks. Something already categorized suddenly needs to be reconsidered. For convenience, this can be described as controlled contradiction. It is not a formal psychological law. The phrase simply captures what happens when inconsistency draws attention without requiring open confrontation. Imagine someone expects you to become defensive as soon as they criticize you. The sequence feels predictable: accusation, reaction, escalation. Then, the expected reaction never comes. You answer calmly, and examine one assumption beneath the accusation, instead of fighting every part of it. The person who expected an emotional reaction now has to update their interpretation of the interaction. For a moment, the broken expectation may occupy more attention than the argument itself. They may wonder whether they misread you, whether something changed, or whether the criticism affected you differently from what they expected. None of those thoughts proves anything. The important point is that attention moved. Conflict gives people something to resist. Inconsistency gives them something to interpret. That does not mean confusion makes people obedient. There is no reliable psychological rule saying a confused person automatically becomes easier to control. A broken pattern can, however, interrupt momentum. Sometimes that interruption is enough to change who feels pressured and who has time to think. This idea also has a darker interpretation. Someone could deliberately create uncertainty by changing warmth, distance, attention, or approval so unpredictably that another person never feels sure where they stand. That may produce intense attention, but attention is not the same as trust. Sometimes what appears to be fascination may partly reflect unresolved uncertainty. A person can become preoccupied with someone's changing behavior because they keep trying to understand why the pattern changed and whether it will return. This is only a possibility, not a diagnosis of complicated relationships. Human behavior is far too messy to assume hidden strategy whenever someone acts inconsistently. Still, unresolved uncertainty can keep attention returning to unanswered questions. Repeated shifts between warmth and distance may therefore occupy disproportionate mental space, even when the relationship itself has not become more meaningful. The useful lesson is narrower. Do not become mechanically predictable under pressure. If criticism always produces anger or distance reliably triggers pursuit, those reactions can eventually be anticipated even without deliberate manipulation. Breaking the automatic sequence restores choice. Sometimes the strongest disruption is not an elaborate psychological tactic. It is simply refusing to supply the reaction another person expected. Silence exposes the same vulnerability from another angle. Conversation normally creates momentum. A question produces an answer. The answer invites a response, and both people expect the exchange to continue. Then, the rhythm stops. Someone asks a question, receives a short answer, and leaves the pause unresolved. That silence can create pressure because people often try to make sense of incomplete information, especially when the missing detail feels personally important. Some begin wondering whether their answer was convincing, whether the other person noticed something, or whether more explanation is expected. Then they start talking again. Silence does not guarantee confession or automatically reveal truth. What it often produces is elaboration. The additional material may be useful, nervous, irrelevant, clarifying, or meaningless. The more dependable effect is simply that the pressure to move next may shift. The interesting question is not who speaks first, but why. Imagine being asked why you made a decision. You answer clearly in one sentence. The other person remains silent. That silence could mean almost anything. They may be thinking, distracted, unconvinced, or simply waiting. Yet the mind may begin inventing explanations. Perhaps the answer sounded weak, perhaps something important was missed, and suddenly another explanation feels necessary. The silence itself contains very little information. Your interpretation supplies most of the pressure, so you add another reason, then more context. Exceptions appear. Personal history enters the conversation. Within a minute, a straightforward decision has turned into a case being presented for approval. Nobody explicitly demanded the additional information. Discomfort with the unresolved pause produced it. That raises a broader question. How often does another person truly pressure us, and how often do we create part of that pressure ourselves because we cannot tolerate not knowing what they think? If somebody learns that silence reliably makes another person over-explain, they may receive more information without asking many additional questions. They may not even be doing it consciously. People learn conversational patterns naturally. That is why the defensive value of silence matters as much as its persuasive value. When another person becomes quiet and you feel compelled to prove yourself, examine the impulse. Determine whether the conversation genuinely requires more information or whether you are trying to escape the feeling of being evaluated. The difference determines whether you are communicating because you choose to, or because discomfort is choosing for you. Silence protects what you reveal. Predictability exposes what happens next. Reliability itself is not weakness. Routines keep relationships stable. Consistency makes teams function, and promises matter. Psychological predictability is different. When criticism reliably produces anger, compliments trigger approval seeking, delays create panic, and challenges lead to long defenses. Reactions begin forming a recognizable map. Nobody needs complete knowledge of your personality. They only need to know which kinds of pressure tend to produce which responses. People may learn those patterns without consciously deciding to manipulate anyone. Over time, the people around you can learn which kinds of pressure make you work harder, seek reassurance, or become more agreeable, even when nobody consciously set out to manipulate you. Repeated interactions teach people what usually happens next. Once a pattern becomes familiar, their own behavior can begin adapting around it. That does not automatically mean manipulation, but predictable emotional rewards and reactions can shape relationships before anyone explicitly recognizes what is happening. Pattern disruption interrupts that automatic process. Someone who normally answers pressure instantly can wait before responding. A person who habitually explains every decision can provide what is necessary and stop. Another person's temporary distance does not have to become an emergency demanding reassurance. The important change happens between stimulus and response. When a familiar trigger stops producing the expected result, the old model becomes less reliable. This may explain why changing one reaction can sometimes alter a larger relationship dynamic. The other person may have been responding partly to a pattern they learned, rather than to a fixed truth about who you are. Withdrawal is where this principle becomes more complicated. Sometimes stepping back protects a legitimate boundary. It can also become leverage when deliberately used to create anxiety. Disappearing to provoke pursuit, withholding normal affection until someone complies, or repeatedly making another person earn basic reassurance turns emotional uncertainty into a reward system. One possibility is that inconsistency keeps attention focused on trying to understand what will happen next. Stable warmth requires relatively little interpretation, while stable distance eventually becomes understandable. Unpredictable changes leave the outcome harder to read. That possibility is another reason to be cautious about turning unpredictability into a relationship strategy. Being difficult to trigger protects autonomy. Deliberately keeping someone emotionally uncertain does the opposite, because trust still depends on reliability, respect, and promises that mean something. The pattern worth breaking is the automatic response another person can exploit, not the reliability that makes healthy relationships possible. Intent helps distinguish the two, and repetition makes the difference clearer. A person who changes an automatic response because they want time to think is protecting choice. Someone who repeatedly creates instability specifically to keep another person anxious is doing something very different. Strength is not nemesis. It is the ability to choose a response instead of having that response summoned automatically. Yet reactions are not the only thing that can be shaped. Sometimes the more important influence lies in deciding what the conversation is actually about. Every difficult conversation takes place inside a frame. The frame determines the central question: which terms define the disagreement, what needs to be defended, and sometimes who begins already positioned as the problem. Most people concentrate on the argument itself and rarely stop to examine the assumptions that gave it shape. Suppose someone calls you selfish. The instinctive reply might be, "I am not selfish, and here is why." That sounds reasonable, but by answering immediately, you may already have accepted their label as the subject of the conversation. Everything that follows now operates inside that definition. The real issue, however, might be a boundary. Someone expected access to your time and disliked being told no. Two people may simply have different beliefs about obligation or responsibility. Reframing begins by examining the premise before defending yourself inside it. Language matters because questions can contain conclusions before they receive answers. "Why are you being difficult?" already assumes difficult behavior is the problem. "Why can't you make a decision?" defines hesitation as failure before the reason for hesitation has been examined. "Why don't you trust me?" moves attention toward your supposed problem with trust, instead of asking whether recent behavior provided a reason for caution. None of these questions proves manipulation. People use loaded language accidentally all the time. The more interesting point is that the most effective frames may be the ones nobody notices as frames. Once the premise feels natural, every response begins inside it. That may be why someone can spend 20 minutes defending themselves and still feel that the conversation never reached the real problem. They may have been answering the wrong question. Reframing does not mean escaping accountability. Sometimes criticism is accurate. A person may genuinely behave selfishly, avoid responsibility, or use clever language to hide uncomfortable facts. A legitimate reframe clarifies evidence rather than erasing it. Still, some accusations can function as positioning as well as description. A label such as difficult may quietly assign one person the role of problem maker before the disagreement has been examined. Once that role is accepted, attention can remain focused on defending one side, while the behavior of the other receives less examination. That is why observable behavior matters more than labels. A related idea, sometimes described in dark psychology discussions as projection inversion, should be treated carefully. The term sounds diagnostic, but it does not justify assuming every accusation is projection. The useful principle is simpler. When somebody accuses you of creating a particular pattern, check whether observable behavior from both sides belongs in the conversation. Suppose they say you have become distant, while communication from their side has been inconsistent for several weeks. A purely defensive response concentrates on proving you are not distant. A more grounded response brings the missing pattern back into view. Communication changed after the interaction itself became less consistent. That does not prove malicious projection. It simply prevents one person's label from erasing relevant evidence. This matters especially for anyone who immediately reacts to labels such as selfish, difficult, cold, emotional, or distant. Once the label lands, the conversation can become consumed by disproving it. A more useful approach is to examine what behavior the label actually describes, what facts it leaves out, and whether keeping the discussion there creates an incomplete picture. Sometimes nobody intentionally benefits from the frame, but checking it can expose assumptions that would otherwise remain invisible. Even recognizing the frame does not solve everything. You can stay calm, reject an inaccurate premise, and resist predictable reactions, then reveal far more information than the situation requires. Modern life encourages disclosure. Plans are announced before they begin. Opinions are shared before they fully form. Emotions appear while they are still being processed, and explanations are often volunteered before anyone asks for them. Openness can create intimacy. Unlimited disclosure creates information. The more another person knows about what frightens you, whose approval matters, which criticism affects you most, and why certain choices feel difficult, the easier some reactions may become to predict. Information asymmetry simply means two people do not possess exactly the same information. That is normal. Honesty does not require total access to every private thought, fear, motive, or unfinished plan. Selective disclosure is not deception. Privacy does not require lying. It means recognizing that not every internal thought automatically belongs to everyone who asks. Over-explaining is where this becomes especially visible. Sometimes explanation stops functioning as communication and begins turning into negotiation for approval. A decision is made. Someone looks disappointed, so you explain. They remain unconvinced, and more context follows. Soon, the discussion includes reasons behind the reasons and personal history that was never necessary to understand their original choice. Eventually, you are no longer communicating a decision. You are trying to make another person emotionally authorize it. That shift can happen almost invisibly. Once approval becomes the reward, disapproval gains influence. The listener may not consciously exploit this. They may simply learn that enough skepticism produces more explanation, greater concession, or deeper emotional exposure. This is why restraint can carry psychological weight, not because mystery is magical, and not because secretive people automatically possess power. The simpler explanation is that unnecessary disclosure gives other people more information about what affects you and how you respond. Limited information can also attract attention for another reason. People often try to make sense of missing details when those details feel personally important. When someone does not explain their motives, the mind may generate possibilities about what they are thinking or what has been missed. Sometimes the imagined explanation becomes more dramatic than reality. Mystery can therefore feel larger than the substance behind it, because the missing information invites interpretation. But that observation cuts both ways. Deliberately creating mystery to keep someone preoccupied can manipulate attention. Recognizing when your own mind is filling an information gap can protect you from the same effect. If another person's silence or limited disclosure begins occupying an unusual amount of mental space, ask whether you are reacting to actual information or to a story created because information was absent. That question brings the entire pattern together. Across all of these patterns, the same thing keeps happening. Pressure changes what receives attention, what feels personal, and how quickly uncertainty becomes uncomfortable. Frames and missing information then shape the questions the mind tries to answer, often before we notice that the conditions of the decision have changed. None of these mechanisms automatically proves manipulation. That is exactly why they are worth understanding. The most consequential influence may not feel like influence at all. It may feel like your own anxiety, curiosity, urgency, need to explain, or a sudden decision to reconsider. And that may be the most unsettling possibility in the entire subject. Someone does not necessarily need to control your thoughts directly. They may only need to create conditions in which your own mind begins supplying the uncertainty, interpretation, and pressure. Seen from that angle, the useful question is not simply whether someone is manipulating you. Trace what actually changed. Look for new evidence, identity pressure, unexplained urgency, assumptions created by silence, loaded labels, or a sudden need for reassurance that did not exist moments earlier. Those signs do not prove hidden intent. They reveal pressure, and pressure becomes easier to evaluate once it is visible. The deeper advantage is therefore not becoming better at confusing everyone around you. It is becoming harder to confuse. Psychological influence can begin long before somebody directly tells you what to do. It may operate through what receives attention, what appears threatening, what suddenly feels urgent, and which explanation now seems necessary. Once those pressures become visible, a small space opens between what happens and what you do next. That space may last only seconds, but even a few seconds can restore choice. The important question is no longer only what another person wants you to think. It is why your own mind suddenly feels compelled to move. recognizing that impulse can reduce the leverage created by uncertainty. None of this requires becoming cold, mysterious, or detached, nor does it require assuming every silence hides a tactic or every disagreement contains manipulation. The goal is a steadier kind of openness, enough consistency to remain trustworthy, enough privacy to protect what is genuinely yours, and enough distance from emotional pressure to examine criticism before accepting the frame around it. Most importantly, separate evidence from psychological pressure, because one of the strongest forms of influence may not be convincing someone to believe a completely new idea. It may begin by weakening their trust in the judgment they already had, long enough for them to start searching elsewhere for certainty. And when that can happen without a command, a threat, or even an obvious argument, then influence may have begun much earlier than most people realized. Which of these psychological patterns do you think is the easiest to miss in real life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this documentary changed how you see the man behind the punches, like and share it. Subscribe to The Quiet Strategist for our next story about the human cost behind the fight. We will see you in the next